Cool. So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about the ego. We talked about this a little bit last week, and this idea about because sometimes if I mean I'm sure you've all can relate. It feels like there's something in your mind that resists mindfulness, right? That resists realization of the self, and that is what's commonly called the ego. And one way to think about it, and these ideas come largely from Alan Watts and Robert Wright. I've mentioned his book before, Why Buddhism is True. And so I've been thinking a lot about those ideas. And so the ego evolved out of this animal ancestors that we all evolved from, right? We evolved from primates. So we have the hardware of an animal in our brains. And our ancestors evolved in nature, living in nature, and nature with all its beauty and harmony, it's still a vicious struggle for life a lot of the time. And so that's our egos evolved in this environment, struggling to just to survive. And natural selection produced egos that survive no matter what. I mean, there's that line from Jurassic Park about life finds a way, and I mean that's kind of like the ego. The ego, through millions of years or billions of years of evolution and natural selection, we've all developed these egos that figure out how to survive no matter what. And the ego itself, at the root of our consciousness, is driven to survive no matter what. And it survives by solving problems for us, by figuring out solutions for the struggles that we're in. And so the ego is constantly looking for solutions, or it's constantly looking for problems to find solutions for. And sometimes finds problems where maybe there aren't really problems there to begin with. But it's because it's like that saying that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, or how's it something I can't it's not quite like that. But you know what I'm talking about. Like when you have a hammer to fix stuff, everything looks like a nail. And so to the ego, everything looks like a problem for it to solve. And it's always, and in a sense, the realization of the spiritual path, finding our divinity, means letting go of the ego. And like we've been talking about, letting go of the idea that there is something we need to fix in our lives. And the ego resists that because the sole purpose the ego exists is to survive and find problems. And so that's why I'm sure you guys have had this sensation where you have some kind of realization about something, you have a little breakthrough about your life, about something that's holding you back. And for a little while, it's great. And you're like, oh, I figured out that problem, and now it's no longer a problem. But then inevitably, through that very realization, the ego sneaks its way back in. You guys know what I'm talking about? You experience that, I'm sure. Yeah. And that's just the crafty nature of the ego trying to do what it does, which is survive and solve problems. And so, but we need this ego to live in the world. Like you said, Tim, we're all having this human experience. We all have lives, we have jobs, we have families. We have to continue using this ego to get by in the world. And so it becomes once again a matter of finding that balance of using the mind, using the making use of all the amazing capabilities of the mind without the mind using us. You often hear the analogy in Buddhist circles about the mind is a team of horses pulling the chariot, and we're the charioteer. Our conscious minds are the charioteer. And so when we're able to control the mind and guide the horses and steer the horses, we can get where we're trying to go and really get there fast. And it can be a well-oiled machine. But when the horses are out of control, then we're just kind of running all over the place. And So it becomes, it's just another example in the spiritual path of finding that balance point. And that's why it's called the middle way. We hear about the Buddha taught the middle way. That's because almost everything in the spiritual path comes down to finding a balance between two extremes. And that balance point is different for each of us. And each one of us has to figure out what our own unique balance point is for whatever particular challenge we're currently experiencing. So does that make sense? Is that, but I'm sure you guys, is that new to anyone? I'm sure you've all heard that in some sense, probably. All right. Well, it's just helpful to keep in mind that in a sense there is this force within your mind trying to counteract what you're attempting to do on the spiritual path. And so it's just good to be aware of that and be aware of that um, tension within yourself. And you're not crazy for feeling like there's this force opposing you.
One thing I want to